Okay, what I'm about to tell you today may seem a little bit odd, may seem offensive to some people, but I am here in Greece and I am hot on the trail for evidence that indicates that the ancient Greek may have been using mushrooms to commune with the gods. This idea is definitely not accepted by the experts, and it is not in your history books. Yet, that is. But from somebody who has a background in mycology, I find this idea not only interesting, look how cool this is, but extremely convincing. And it all went down here.
Found it.
This is what I was looking for. Be the cookie on. Now I know this idea is going to put a lot of people off. I would not have accepted it myself before I started looking into it. It seems very unusual. But the fact of the matter is we are still learning a lot about the ancient world, and we're piecing it together not only from the history books, but what is in front of us in archaeological sites like the one that I'm standing in right at the moment. Now, before I get to this particular finding and why the Greeks may have had the longest running psychedelic cult in history, I want you to think for a second, why is our understanding of history changing now? Well, I think part of it comes down to, much like this hallucinogenic mushroom was used by people in the far north for rituals and then it was all but erased by European historians, so too were many of the pagan practices of antiquity. Whoever writes the history books filters what we know. And for a long time, nobody wanted to repeat the narrative that the founders of our civilization were probably using drugs. I mean, I get it. I'm a parent. I have kids. You want simple stories to tell at bedtime, and you definitely don't want people using drugs, especially not kids. The problem is history is full of nuance, and today we have modern scientific tools. We also have our eyeballs so we can look around, and we can take those historical texts and compare them to what we're seeing out in places like this. And that is why I am here in Greece. You see, in this area around Athens, which was the head of the Greek world, Athenians partook in a series of rituals to worship and give homage to Persephone, the vegetation goddess, and her mother, Demeter, the goddess of the harvest. And it took place annually from right here in the very heart of Athens, and would end 12 miles to the west, right here in the sacred city. This is Eleusis, and we know only a little bit about what happened here, but we know that people of all forms of life came and participated in these ceremonies, and they were meant to keep it a secret. In other words, not tell anybody about it. We know it now as the Eleusinian Mysteries. And they did a really good job of keeping it a secret because for 2,000 years, almost every Greek participated, and yet we have almost no documentation as to what happened here other than it was life-changing for the people who visited, and they never saw life or death the same again afterwards. Artists have tried to recreate what Eleusis must have looked like, pictured here as a massive complex that could hold upwards of 3,000 people. It's hard to imagine that given that today, this area is all but a mound of rubble in a port town with dozens of oil tankers sitting on the once pristine Gulf, and the neighborhoods full of the hustle of industrial modern Greece. On top of that, when we visited, we were the only ones here, gazing upon the ruins. But to help you understand why I think there may have been a psychedelic drug involved, it's important that you picture exactly what archaeologists do know about the events of the ceremony. Here's what we know. It involved dramatic reenactments, visual displays, that initiates went through a purification process and then fasted and were given a sacred drink known as the koukion. And the sacred drink may be the key to all of it, but here's what happened over the course of the 9 days. On day 1, they would gather in Athens. Day 2, they'd bathe and purify themselves and sacrifice a pig. Day 3, they'd give an offering of barley. This is important, by the way. Day 4, they'd sleep in a sacred area honoring Asclepios, the god of healing. Day 5, they'd walk the sacred road from Athens to Eleusis. And trust me, you can't do this easily today. I tried, it was a little sketchy. Day 6, they'd enter the sacred telesterion, continue fasting, and break it with the koukion. Day 7, they'd have mystical visions where they witnessed things done, things shown, and things said. Day 8, they experienced divine epiphany and moments of spiritual awe. Possibly this is where the ear of grain was presented. And by the way, that grain today has psychedelic mushrooms that grow on them, known as ergot. I'll come back to this in a bit, it's important. Day 9, they'd return transformed and swear to keep what they saw and did a secret. So that's what we know. And look, I've had life-changing weeks with friends, and none of it included mushrooms or a sacred drink for that matter. And I don't want this to sound blasphemous by making it sound like mushrooms alone and nothing else contributed to these life-changing events. Because clearly there was a whole ceremony and ritual around all of this. But I want you to take these things into account. Pindar said, "Blessed is he who, having seen these rites, goes below the earth. He knows the end of life and its God-sent beginning." I mean, okay, maybe they just got educated in the festival. "Thrice happy are those of mortals who, having seen the rites, depart for Hades. For to him alone is it granted to have true life there." Seeing Hades. I mean, maybe this was just part of the reenactment, hard to say. "Beautiful indeed is the mystery given us by the blessed gods. Death is for mortals, no longer an evil, but a blessing." You're talking about death as a blessing? "Many have wandered in darkness, but those who are initiated into the mysteries live with purpose and joy." Purpose and joy after the darkness? "The mysteries preserve the hope of eternal life and a better fate in the next world. We have learned from the beginnings of life, and we have gained the power not only to live happily, but also to die with better hope." So they saw their life from the beginning to the end, and then they were not afraid. "Via the mysteries, people live more rightly and die more hopefully." A lot of morality given to people in one short week. "They showed to the initiates a sacred vision which inspired awe and holiness." And I just don't understand why nobody spelled out what the sacred visions told them. In fact, it was more ineffable. It was really hard to explain. And this is why I think it might be something related to mushrooms. Aristotle here almost gives it away. "There are two things which are the most important gifts the gods give to men: the mysteries and the grain of Demeter." So in other words, the set and setting here in Eleusis and this grain. But why the grain? Well, we're still starting to unlock the mysteries of that, but it all relates to the drink that was in here, the kukion. We know it was a barley drink with other herbs. I just did a deep dive on poppies, and one thing they probably had in it was opium. They talked about it inducing dreams and visions, so in that respect, the poppies make a lot of sense.
Oh my gosh, that's
an opium poppy.
Whoa, that's crazy.
Then, besides being drunk from this alcohol mix, grains have the potential to have something more toxic in it, a fungus that grows on the grains called ergot. In particular, it grows on the stalks and it affects each individual grain. And what I'm doing right at the moment is I'm looking for ergot fungus. If you were to see it, it would look like this. It's so small you might not even know what it was, just a blackened grain. What's even more fascinating is that this fungi is totally psychoactive, but not like these mushrooms. These are mushrooms I documented a couple of years ago. I bring them up for two reasons. First, you have to understand they were something that nobody in Western society had experienced with in our modern times. That was until Gordon Wasson reintroduced us to them in the 1950s in this article. Only after that were people really able to start making correlations between an experience on magic mushrooms and the very nature of how the Greeks talked about the Eleusinian mysteries. Look how oddly similar the Greek quotes are to what I heard on my trip to Jamaica.
The person who arrived 2 days ago is not the person who's going home. And I can't quite say what the difference is. I feel like it was 1,000 years of therapy in 8 hours.
It just worked as a magic.
It has just been so transformative.
A beautiful, warm feeling, here right now.
The only problem is that the fungi that grows on rye does not have psilocybin in it, which is the active ingredient in magic mushrooms. What it does have is a lysergic acid. Now, Albert Hofmann started with that compound. He then made a bunch of derivatives of that compound by tweaking the end molecules. The 25th variant was called LSD-25. The visions that people have on LSD are very similar to the visions people have on psilocybin mushrooms. The LSD ones just last a little longer. The point is, ergot has compounds in it that have similar visions to LSD. Keep that in mind. And this isn't my theory. It was laid out by 3 people. The guy who rediscovered magic mushrooms, the guy who invented LSD, and a Greek classics professor from Boston University. Together, they have an impressive argument. But the theory came out a few years after the war on drugs started in the 1970s. People completely dismissed it, either because nothing had ever been written about ergot in the literature, or because no one had ever found the hard evidence of chemical residue. And that is exactly what Brian Murarescu laid out in this famous book here. He explained they couldn't test for anything here in Eleusis, because they had already treated all the artifacts before reliable tests were available to test for ergot. He noted similar rituals would have likely been performed all over the Greek world at the time, meaning the evidence could potentially come from any sacramental drinking container in this Greek colonized area. And it turns out, right here in Spain, he found what he was looking for.
They also found the remains of ergot.
And this is all fairly new evidence. It would probably also have to be found at another site, but if it holds up, it would basically validate this claim. But even without that proof, my claim is this. I don't see how everyone in the Greek world for almost 2,000 years kept the secret of what they saw here at Eleusis, unless what they saw was very hard to explain, and the secret was really just with the priests, or a very small group of people administering the ceremonies. And maybe even they didn't fully understand what they were administering. Now, they obviously knew, but I say that because we know about ergot now and the LSD-like compounds that were in them, and we know more about the visions that they're able to create and chemically, biochemically inside of us, what that does. Now, if you followed this argument, you might be thinking, why does this even matter? Who cares what rituals our ancient ancestors performed? And who cares if anyone tried to cover that up? Well, my thought has always been that we can learn a lot by adopting certain things from our ancient past. In other words, maybe there are things we can learn and bring with us into these modern and crazy times. If this was a psychedelic experience on a grand cultural scale, it means Western culture actually has very deep roots in using these compounds. And if that's true, well, then the whole thing was lost to history very quickly, potentially by sheer force from one dogmatic and ruthless ruler, who then rewrote history. So my hope is that scientists, archaeologists, and the public can keep an open mind to this fascinating and promising theory. But until then, these mysteries will still remain a mystery. So I don't know. I would like you to tell me what you think. Was this just theater here in Eleusis? Or was it also a drug-induced vision that people had that allowed them to have a life-changing experience? Leave your comment down below and let me know what you think. It is so hot here in Greece. It's like 100 degrees. We're trying to film at the archaeological site. Haley's doing such an amazing job, so I want to thank her.
This is the spiritual center of ancient Greece.
I also want to thank the sponsors of today's videos, Magic Spoon. That's such an appropriately named company, I think, given the fact that we're talking about the god of harvest. I will also say I love my cereals, and I try to limit my cereal most of the time, but with Magic Spoon cereal, I can eat a lot more of it and I feel much better about it because it has so much protein, and as somebody who's trying to be health conscious, that protein is key. I did bring it with me to Greece, although I've been trying as much as possible to enjoy Greek cuisine. Haley made sure of that. This one is my favorite. This one's like having a fudge brownie in your bag. Very little sugar, only 1 gram of total sugar. So why don't you just go to magicspoon.com/StoneAgeMan. You can get $5 off yours. You can try it. It's 100% satisfaction guarantee, so you can return it. They're not going to ask questions. I actually really like the company Magic Spoon because they add a little bit of fun, something that's more of an adult type cereal or treat. That's my perspective on it because they have so much protein and no added sugars. So there you have it. I'm not sure if the algorithm is going to send you this video unless you put that notification on and you try to check in all the time with Stone Age Man. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Here, I mean, it shows the potion right on the symbols. Wow. Don't you think?